Now, Lebanon's Prime Minister has warned that his country is at risk of being dragged into a new war. It's after Israel carried out a wave of air and artillery strikes on southern Lebanon. Lebanese media say that a girl is among 2 people killed in the Israeli strikes. They were ordered in response to rockets fired into Israel for the first time since November's ceasefire. The 3 rockets were intercepted and there were no injuries. Well, the Israeli military says it hit dozens of Hezbollah rocket launchers, though the militant group has denied responsibility for the attacks on northern Israel. Well, I spoke to our correspondents Hugo Bachega in Beirut and Dan Johnson in Jerusalem, and I started by asking Hugo how significant this escalation of violence is.
You had a number of rockets, several rockets being fired from Lebanon into Israel. The Israeli military said 3 rockets were intercepted in the town of Metula, the first time that we had this kind of attack since this ceasefire was implemented. No casualties were reported in Israel, but in response to this attack, the Israeli military launched the most intense wave of airstrikes in Lebanon. The military said it had targeted dozens of rocket launchers and a command center being used by Hezbollah here in Lebanon, which is obviously this powerful armed group and political movement here in the country. We had an update from the Lebanese authorities saying that at least 2 people were killed, including a child, as a result of those attacks. Now, no group has claimed responsibility for the attack from Lebanon earlier today. Hezbollah, which is the main armed group operating here in Lebanon, based in Lebanon, has denied having any kind of involvement in the attack. But what is interesting here is that this happens just days after Israel renewed its military operation in Gaza. So it could be that the attack today was a reaction to that.
Hugo, thank you. Dan, in Jerusalem, who is Israel saying that launched the strikes into Israel?
The word from the Israeli government is that the origin of these rocket attacks is at the moment unconfirmed, but that in response the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister ordered Israel Defence Forces to launch those strikes against Hezbollah positions and targets. And that is because the Israeli perspective is that even if Hezbollah is denying responsibility, even if Hezbollah wasn't responsible, the fact that some armed group in the south of Lebanon felt emboldened enough, perhaps by the events of earlier this week in Gaza, to launch these rockets shows that there is now a new threat to citizens of northern Israel, something that the Israeli government and the defence forces take very seriously indeed. And the Israeli perspective will be that nobody would dare launch such a rocket attack from southern Lebanon without at least the possibility of Hezbollah sanctioning that they would at least have been aware of it and would probably back it, even if that approval had not been explicitly sought by whatever group set off these rocket launchers. That's why Israel's defence forces have launched these strikes. There are further strikes continuing and the possibility of that intensifying even further. It doesn't mean that we're going to see the complete breakdown of the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, but it does illustrate the risk to citizens on both sides of that border, perhaps flowing from what we saw in Gaza earlier this week.
So potentially not a breakdown of the ceasefire, but Hugo, when it comes to the Lebanese Prime Minister, he is warning that his country is being dragged into another war.
Yeah, there has been some very strong reaction from the Lebanese authorities. The Prime Minister warned that an escalation of hostilities could bring devastation to this country. The country's new president, Joseph Aoun, also condemning attempts to drag Lebanon into a cycle of violence. And the country's defense minister said the army has launched an investigation into the attack that happened earlier today. The Lebanese military said it had dismantled 3 improvised rocket launchers that had been used in this attack. I mean, Lebanon is under a lot of pressure internally. We're talking about a conflict that was devastating, especially for the Shia Muslim community, which is the bulk of Hezbollah support. The group is facing, the challenge of providing financial assistance to its supporters to try to rebuild communities destroyed by the war. And Lebanon's international allies have been saying that there will be no help for Lebanon if the government doesn't act to curb Hezbollah's power. This is the most powerful group here in Lebanon. There is a lot of talk here in Lebanon about trying to engage in negotiations to disarm the group. We haven't had any kind of concrete plan yet, but this really shows the challenges facing this new government, and indeed the pressure on the authorities, concerned that this could lead to even more violence.
Our thanks to Hugo Bachega and, of course, Dan Johnson.